This is a Momentum Media production.
The SMSF Advisor Show. Your expert insights into the biggest themes shaping the SMSF advice industry.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the SMSF Advisor Show. I'm joined by my co-host, Aaron Dunn, Chief Executive of Smarter SMSF. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Miranda. How are you?
I'm good, and how are you?
Not too bad. It's been a pretty busy fortnight if you think about announcements, and we'll obviously talk about what's making news shortly, but it's been nice, been out on the road again to events once again. So looking forward to this thing called COVID normal. So, going to airports, catch up with people, all these weird and wonderful things. So, but as is always the case, I did just say then there's been a bit making news. So I'll get you to kick it off.
Yeah, so certainly a lot happening on the gnarly front this week. So the biggest announcements obviously to do with Senator Jane Hume announcing that the government will be looking at those issues with the non-arm's length income and expenditure rules and fixing up some of the issues in that space.
Yeah, so this was very pleasing to see. This only has come out, I think, in the last 24 hours or so after some pretty intense lobbying. And I know this has been a topic that from memory, we've had both Daniel Butler and also Tony Negline on to talk to. And those sessions, if you didn't hear them, I would suggest going back and listening to them. And I think Tony in particular raised a large number of concerns. And this has been the result of ongoing consultation with the tax office and the ATO obviously finalising LCR 2021/2, formalising their position. Now, the reality is all the ATO is doing is formalising a position based upon how the law was drafted. So once that had formally landed, of course, there was a fair bit of pushback as a result of the finalisation of that, and therefore required lobbying to Treasury and to government at large to try and address some of these key issues. And that's really what Senator Jane Hume has announced, that they do intend on addressing these issues. They will impact both APRA-regulated funds and SMSFs, and I believe that the intention is that they will look to correct those with an intention to apply from 1 July 2022, which is a fantastic outcome because if you think at the moment we have a PCG in place that gives a level of amnesty for arrangements in SMSFs where accounting fees and advice fees and so forth, where they're not charged, where they weren't or at arm's length, they won't taint the fund from a gnarly perspective. But of course, unless they are adjusted to an arm's length arrangement from 1 July 2022, they would then actually form part of the non-arm's length income of the fund for the year and in essence, again, taint the entire fund. So there is a bit of urgency around it to get it fixed, but it was great to now see the government acknowledge what those concerns are, and we will have a bit more consultation and then hopefully come up with some amendments to Section 295/550.
Yeah, we've already seen a lot of positive reactions from the major accounting bodies and the associations welcoming this announcement.
You're right. Yeah, so you're right. There's been universal acknowledgement that they're happy with the outcome and will obviously look to work with government to make adjustments so that the outcomes that are currently in place won't continue.
Yeah, there's one small concern that was raised around the date at which it will apply, which at the moment is intended to apply from 1 July this year. And there's been some concerns raised that perhaps it should actually apply retrospectively back to 1 July 2018.
Yeah, which is when those laws came in initially. So I guess that, from an SMSF perspective, as I said before, we've got our practical compliance guidance that does give relief in an SMSF context. But, there are other aspects that it doesn't apply to. So anyway, that's what the consultation process is for. It'll flesh that out and then it will go into bill format and of course we'll need to get finalised. But there is that small thing called a federal election in between.
Yes, and we've obviously got the budget coming up next week as well.
Absolutely.
And the other big sort of announcement on the gnarly in the big gnarly area is from the ATO, which was regarding that PCG 2016/5, and we've seen them sort of address some of those inconsistencies that were there between that guidance and what they released in the LCR.
Yeah, so that PCG, for those that just don't know these numbers off the top of their head, Miranda, so I'm one of them that actually does with this one, but it's the safe harbour provisions for related party LRBAs. So we have in there benchmark requirements, but we also have requirements around on expectations where you would need to demonstrate an arm's length dealing if you don't comply with that benchmark. And there are arrangements that may have originally been not on arm's length, and there were timeframes, I think it was the 31st of January 2017, that they needed to be complied with. And the disconnect then was presented when we got to our SMSF, LCR, I should say, 2021/D2, where it said if you have uncommercial terms that have been entered into to acquire a particular asset, including through the use of LRBAs and stuff, then you permanently taint that arrangement, regardless of whether it's restructured or not. So we've now seen some amendments being put into that PCG that really address that specific issue so that those arrangements will not be subject to the new nullity provisions.
The other thing we've seen is the announcement from the ATO regarding the temporary superstream measure where SMSFs that are finding rollovers difficult because perhaps they haven't been able to find an ESA provider, haven't been able to do that rollover. They can apply to the ATO to request to do that rollover outside of the superstream system.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. I've heard there's a build-up of frustration, I think, in the industry, how this is working. And I've had a chat to a few people about it and so forth. So I think this is somewhat of a bit of an olive branch by the ATO to say, look, we understand there are people trying to comply with what the superstream measures do, but they just don't have an understanding of the requirements. And that includes the fact that you need to obtain an electronic service address because they've only been relevant previously for contributions, employer contributions. So we've also had a number of ESA providers who only support contributions and don't support rollovers. So there's this real disconnect in how this is working. What is important to note that this is relief only for where people are having trouble. So it doesn't allow you to just go, bugger it, I'm just going to circumvent this and do it. If you don't comply with superstream, it is a compliance breach. That is one absolutely critical component. And the ATO make it very clear in the communication that they've released about this is that it requires you to contact them. They will try and work out with you whether you do have an ESA that can accept rollers or you don't. And then they will give you, in essence, the golden ticket to bypass and a reference number because you're going to have to provide that to the auditor because it would otherwise be a compliance breach. So you can kind of see there's so many parts to this that could become quite tricky and difficult and therefore problematic if you don't get this right. And so, like I said, the ATO is providing this as an olive branch. They're obviously going to be reviewing this for a period of time, and I'm sure they're going to be continuing to consult with a variety of stakeholders to try and get this right too.
So the superstream and, of course, the NALI are both really important topics that have received a lot of interest lately. And if SMSF practitioners are looking for more information on those kinds of topics, they can always visit the SMSF Foundations course, which you, of course, run,
Authored.
Aaron.
Yes, yeah. So these are things that we cover in that course quite clearly. The things that we're talking about here form part of updates that we run on that course on a regular basis. So it is 7 modules, currently provides 21 CPD hours, very much looks to the heart of things like non-arm's length income, looks at the regulatory and administrative requirements around things like superstream. So, if it is an area around your SMSF knowledge that you do want to increase, you can visit the SMSF Advisor Knowledge Centre and access that course as part of the partnership that we have with SMSF Advisor on the education of self-managed super funds.
And the other thing we saw, which was almost 2 weeks ago now, was just the government released those terms of reference for the quality of advice review. They've confirmed that they will be examining that tax practitioners board recommendation around what kinds of advice accountants should be able to provide, but they did narrow what they're going to be looking at in terms of wholesale advice.
Yeah, so the interesting one, I think, with a lot of our listeners is, obviously you mentioned there the review of the tax practitioner board recommendations. So we've seen advisors move out of the tax financial advisor regime, in essence, with the TPB, and the TPB review that occurred, probably the final report was some 18 months or so ago, did make the recommendation that to ensure that there's a level playing field, that the government should, as part of this review, look at the scope in which accountants would be able to potentially provide advice. So that has formed part of those final terms of reference that we did see. So, of course, the report is to be finalised and submitted to government. I think it's the middle of December, off the top of my head. So there is going to be a lot of water go under the bridge in 2022 when it comes to, what that might look like in its final form.
So in our next segment, we're going to be discussing UK pension transfers, also known as QROPS in some cases, if they meet those requirements. With the world opening back up again post-COVID-19, the transfer of foreign pensions is becoming a more prominent issue again for advisors. SMSFs can be used for these transfers, but there's obviously some very important requirements that need to be met in order to avoid significant taxes and things like that. And to take us through that, we're going to be joined by Jason O'Connell, who is the General Manager of UK Pension Planning Australia at Shartru. He's a specialist in this area, so we're very fortunate to have him join us, and he'll be taking us through some of the important considerations when undertaking those types of transfers. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Miranda, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So just to start off, what are some of the key considerations or requirements for UK expats or perhaps returning Australians looking to transfer their UK pension benefit to an Australian fund?
Wow, where do I start? Well, look, as ever, it boils down to people's individual circumstances. So just really looking at what assets and income streams are in place to support retirement and how do they all link together. So establishing whether transferring a foreign superannuation, such as a UK pension to Australia, and whether that's the right thing for any individual. But really, I think it's all about identifying how it could potentially make a meaningful difference. So there are many ways in which that can be. So taxation, mitigating currency risk, which given sometimes people have very significant foreign superannuations, currency risk can be something which can have a huge impact, and it could be, good or bad on a retirement outcome. Aligning investment strategies to complement the overall retirement planning investment strategy. And really, more often than not, it's not a simple binary decision whether to transfer or not. There are so many strategies which need to be considered. And the Australian superannuation system actually, while provides some challenges around understanding the limitations and the caps and everything, does offer some fantastic opportunities. And often what we find is sometimes there is no right or wrong to transferring or not. It can be a hybrid approach, which really looking at, what is the right value to transfer in, and maybe is there to complement that a UK drawdown strategy with that to get the best outcome. So for clients with personal pensions, there's also a UK state pension to consider. So that's an assessable income, so it's assessable for tax. And there are some ways to enhance that pension income in retirement. So it's fixed income. It's a contributory-based system in the UK, so quite different to Australia. And that can have a big bearing on the different types of income streams and whether you want to be paying income tax on your UK pension or whether you prefer to have it in Australia to draw it down. So, of course, as you said yourself, it's not just UK expats. So when I came here to Australia, I naively assumed that I was going to be dealing just with UK expats. I have lots of returning Australian clients as well. And not just Australians, there's Irish and there's French and German who've lived and worked in the UK. who've all come to Australia for the same reason as me, the good weather, the great lifestyle and food. But they also need to sit down and look at their not just their UK pension, but whatever other pensions that they have, foreign superannuations they have. So just a couple of quick stats on this, which I think are really interesting. And there's hundreds of thousands of returning Australians and other nationalities who are living in Australia with foreign superannuation. If we look at the UK, there was 87,000 Australians registered as living there in 2021. Now that came down from 2020, which was about 95,000, somewhere between 95 to 100,000 in 2020. I suspect that's down to wanting to get home to Australia during the pandemic.
Yep.
In Australia, there's over 1 million people with British passports. And so that's quite a large target market when you think of people who have that advice need. So if I go back to UK pension history, tax relief was first introduced in the Finance Act in 1921. So in terms of how pensions have evolved, retirement savings in the UK, we've had so many iterations of different types of pension structures that actually it's depending on, and the older someone is and the longer it is since they've been in the UK, they can often have pension styles that most people have never seen. So it's about first and foremost just understanding, what do I have? How's it going to be treated when I get to retirement? Is it in the best place for me? Whether that involves a transfer to Australia or it's just about rejigging things in the UK. So, and a challenge really that many Australian advisors and members of foreign superannuations have is that, they're very different to Australian superannuation. So all with the same purpose, to provide retirement income. So for instance, if we take the UK, or most European places actually, you've got a juxtaposed taxation system in comparison to Australian superannuation. So the best way to refer to it, I believe, is that the UK and most of Europe operates a tax-free taxed system, whereas in Australia, it's upside down,
yep.
No pun intended.
As a result of mandated contributions, right? So the Howard and Costello decided to, the three pillars, rather than tax it at the end, they decided to tax it up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, the UK have got so much revenue coming in from tax pension income, and that they probably have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of what they do on the other side. But that's right. And because of that, often the best outcome is someone accumulates over many years UK pension money. So the contribution is tax-free and it's relieved. The growth in the earnings is tax-free. And when someone goes to crystallize those benefits and draw an income from it, that's when HMRC gets all the tax relief back in the form of assessable income. But it's also important to know that that is also assessable income under the double taxation agreement in Australia. So ultimately, the taxing rights are Australian for this type of income, but those taxing, it is assessable irrespective of where you're living.
Yep.
So given all of that, it's often the best thing to accumulate UK pension tax relief benefits, and in the approach to retirement, to look at what can I benefit by bringing this or bringing part of this money into Australia.
Yeah. So as a recognised overseas pension scheme, which is where people start to see that terminology of a ROP or ROPS, and then the Q obviously is a qualifying one.
Correct. And there's not many people in Australia I've come across who know that. Because ROPS, of course, is EU legislation. And the Q is an opt-out to EU legislation, which was introduced in 2006. So, and there's a lot of terminology around it. And like anything to do with, if UK advisors to look at the terminology around superannuation, they're going to be scratching their head just as much as the other way around. So
as many acronyms over there as we have here with T-bars and TVCs and TSBs and GSTs and ABNs and TFNs.
Yeah, God.
I can keep going.
It's the world we live in, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. So I think specifically then, if we kind of look to the ability to transfer over, and we just mentioned that concept, SMSFs have certainly been a clear benefactor of the fact that people from the UK are wanting to transfer over. And I think it goes back to some changes in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. Trying to refresh my memory, but maybe get you to elaborate a little bit around the restrictions and or the process that people need to be aware of when there's a decision made that money is going to be, in essence, migrated across with them to Australia?
Yeah, look, absolutely. QROPS legislation, as I mentioned, is a UK opt-out of ROPS, which is all about the freedom of movement of capital in the EU. So the right for someone to transfer their retirement savings from one EU jurisdiction to another when they move. So with regard to QROPS and Australia, if we go back to 2015, when the UK had sent out a consultation back in the early parts of 2014, looking at trying to align QROPS rules with UK pension rules. They referred back to what they call the age test, which is the preservation age. Effectively, in the UK, it's currently 55.
Yep.
Although the normal minimum pension age is due to increase to 57 in 2028, but HMRC have not confirmed whether that will impact QROPS or not, but we believe it will because of that link back to that age test in 2015.
Yep.
So we saw over 1,600 QROPS in Australia being written to by HMRC, asking for clarification around the age test. And of course, with the provision for early access with financial hardship, severe financial hardship, compassionate grounds, or even as we saw the COVID early release.
Yep.
With that, HMRC deemed that every single one of the Australian QROPS except one, and that was a local government scheme which was receiving local government schemes from the UK. That was the only one that was deemed to be compliant, and that was because they're actually exempt from the age test. So it's not that they had the restriction in there. So every single QROPS is delisted. And then back, we slowly but surely are starting to see them come back. We're back up to 1,500, and there is one retail super fund, so which kind of links into, about SMSFs. The rest are all SMSFs, every single one of them. So a retail fund is going to be absolutely appropriate for some people. Not everyone wants to take on responsibilities of being a trustee of an SMSF. So there is just that one option out there. So when we go to bring it in, if we look at the restrictions, first and foremost, we've got a membership age restriction going back to the age test, which is 55. So there can be no membership within a registered QROPS where there's even the right for a member under the age of 55.
Yep.
So that's probably the key one,
yep.
The first one. And we've seen a lot of evolution around the QROPS. And I've heard a lot of industry talk about, are the UK trying to do away with them? I personally don't believe they are. I think if we go back to the spirit of the legislation, it's about genuine cases where people relocate their lives and bringing their retirement savings with them.
Yep.
So in terms of the UK and the QROPS legislation, we now have a lot of certainty around Australia. And if we look at an SMSF as an option, we've got, again, where sometimes you'll find a couple. You might find one spouse is over 55 and the other is under 55. So that needs to be looked at carefully. And then in terms of what the QROPS needs to look like, well, the trustee needs to reflect the fact that it recognises its obligations in terms of reporting, which is a 10-year requirement back to HMRC. Not as scary as it sounds. That's just around certain events. So drawdown, onwards transfer, re-notification after 5 years, or something simple like a trustee changing their contact details so that HMRC can still keep in touch with them. Then you've got some restrictions around the investment strategy. So there are certain assets which are not permissible as investments in UK pensions. And it's fairly simple. It's residential property and taxable property. So things like vehicles, art, movable. So artwork, jewellery, stuff like that. So we often come across a client who's looking to use an existing SMSF. And the process there is where they'll go and get the trust deed updated to account for the fact that it's now going to be a QROPS. And then there may be some segmentation of the UK and the Australian money just to make sure that there's no issues in the future around, because it's only important what happens with the UK money when you come to the rules. You can't have Australian money. It's not always right to do it, to mix the two, but it can be done.
Yeah. And I think, Miranda, so one of the things we've seen, we had to make some specific changes with our Smarter SMSF deed. So you have specifically when people are looking to set them up or do deed upgrades, as Jason was saying, is you need to prescribe within the rules around membership. You need to also prescribe in saying payment of benefits. So as Jason said before as well about ability to access at an age prior to that, ultimately through hardship or compassionate grounds or whatever it is. So these are the sorts of things that have to be ultimately unpacked and therefore, in essence, submitted for and therefore to receive the qualifying status. So I'm interested, Jason, there as well, because I think that one of the interesting things that people need to get their head around as well is, and it's not only the structural to set up, and you made comment of the, where you'd have to consider the blending of money, so Australian super money and then bringing that money in, but the reporting requirements as well. So because there'd be a lot of administrators that listen to this in the SMSF space, and understanding what the requirements are there, I think is equally as important as trying to get it in. So maybe just elaborate a little bit more. I know you said it's maybe not as onerous as what people think, but what does the reporting actually mean, and what's entailed in that process?
So there's prescribed HMRC documents, and HMRC obviously being the UK tax authority, for certain events. So as I said, it's not as daunting as it can seem. It's very simple. You go online to HMRC's website. They've got a very user-friendly for people who know how to look around it. Yep. Identify what the reporting event is, fill in the appropriate form, and send it off to HMRC. In terms of, you mentioned something really important there, I think, around the administration. I've spoken to a lot of administrators who initially will say to me, if a client comes to me with an existing SMSF and we get the trust deed updated, and the client will say to me, I want to continue using my administrator, service provider. And I'll have a chat with the administrator who will tell me initially, I've done this before, it's not a problem. We talk through it. And often actually I get the response back, do you know anybody who actually specializes in this area? Because really, I'm not sure that we have enough of this type of structure to justify keeping our eyes over all of that. Yep. And there are specialist administrators out there, and that's, I think, a consideration for any advisor or client, is just making sure that, the more people who specialize in the area that you surround yourself with, the less chance you have of coming foul of something which will end up in a poor outcome with an unnecessary tax or a non-complying fund.
I also just wanted to ask you, with that change you mentioned with the UK pensions, with the age increasing to 57 potentially, will that mean deed updates as well if that comes through?
Yeah, so look, in my experience with HMRC, they rarely retrospectively meddle with things. So it's usually from this date forward, anyone who wasn't entitled to now has to. So I would suggest that, of course, we don't even have confirmation as to whether the normal minimum pension age change will actually impact QROPS. As I said at the beginning, I suspect it will because of the link to the age test. But I suspect, given previous history, that it will be for new funds which are being established from that date.
And the other thing here, I guess, one of the big ticket items coming through from 1 July 2022 is around the removal of the work test. And we have, obviously changes or the ability for, contributions, and the level of contribution obviously not changing, but the age in which contributions can be made. There are restrictions obviously here with contributions coming into a fund. And then, so from a UK pension transfer point of view, what do we need to keep in mind with transferring pensions across when we think about the relationship that we've got with the NCC rules and the caps that exist?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think this was a significant development for people with larger balances in foreign superannuation schemes. As we know, the repealing of the work test requirement means that, actually, if I just go back a step and explain, when you bring a UK pension in, it effectively comes in two components. Yep. There's what we call the growth component and the non-growth component. So in Australian terms, the non-growth is your applicable fund earnings. And that's going to be taxed in the same way as it would have been if the individual had brought their UK pension in a suitcase with them when they arrived in Australia right back at the beginning. So, and depending on whether you opt to pay that as an individual, which will be done at your own marginal rate of tax, or a concessional rate for the fund if it's a complying transfer. And there's a bit of detail around that. I don't know if we have the time for today, but a bit of detail around that, which we can go into again.
Yep.
Effectively, you first of all look at what is the difference in value between the day that the individual arrived in Australia and the day they transfer. So that's your growth component, that's your AFE, and that comes in. But along with that, the non-growth is all brought in as non-concessional contributions. So obviously, we've got the contribution caps to be mindful of here in Australia. We can, of course, bring forward those extra 2 years. But we've also got to watch your total superannuation balance. So there's a few moving parts to it. It's not just as simple as, oh, there's the growth, there's the non-growth, and we just bring the whole thing in. It can actually take a number of years to bring a pension in. But the great news that came out of that for people with UK pensions is if you're looking at retiring and not working past 64, you no longer have to meet that work test, because those non-concessional contributions, you're obviously not going to be claiming any deduction on those. So that requirement then is no longer there to meet that up to the age of 74. So that should allow people with larger balances to bring more in, or to be less aggressive and, not looking at other types of strategies which could be looked at. And I think with that, there's another important factor is tackling this early is really important, because you may have a family where you've got, which we often see, where you've got one spouse has got a much larger superannuation balance and often a much larger foreign superannuation balance. So if you start this process at 60, 61, and all of a sudden you've got very little planning opportunities left. So doing it as early as possible means you can look at your contribution splitting and any other type of planning strategy that will allow you to manage your balances to ensure that you can ultimately get the maximum amount of combined foreign and Australian superannuation into the most tax-effective structure to produce retirement income for the rest of your life. So but it is important to look at that. The sooner you do it, the more planning opportunities you might have.
Yep.
Well, we've covered a fair bit of ground, and you've raised some really important considerations there. Is there anything else that should be considered with this type of advice around UK pension transfers?
Sure. There's a couple of other things that I'd probably touch on. One would be UK tax considerations. So with a standard transfer, and for most people, they'll be able to bring all of their UK pension into Australia without any UK taxation. However, there are a couple of things to consider. So first is the introduction of the overseas transfer charge in 2017. And that's where HMRC were, again, looking at the spirit of what was behind QROPS legislation. And so every single overseas transfer, irrespective of where it's going, so Europe, Australia, New Zealand, to a QROPS, is subject to this overseas transfer charge. And that's a 25% tax on the total amount that's being transferred. However, there are a number of exemptions which apply. And the key exemption for Australian residents is being a resident in the same jurisdiction, same country as the receiving scheme. So transferring a UK pension to an Australian registered QROPS, be that a retail or an SMSF, ticks that box. However, you do need to continue to meet the residency requirement for 5 full UK tax years. And there's a little thing to just be careful on there. They're not calendar years, they're UK tax years, which is April 6 to April 5 every year. And if, as an example, if someone was to transfer their pension now, and this was the date, so say, March, that 5 years doesn't start until the next 6th of April. So it's those 5 full UK tax years, and it applies to every tranche of transfer. So where someone has a large balance and they're going to bring in quite a bit. So people need to be fairly committed to retiring and staying in Australia, or certainly at least for those 5 years, because this charge is retrospective on a notification basis. And of course, unfortunately, for someone in that situation, it's not possible to transfer an Australian superannuation back to Australia to put them back in the position they were. The other taxation consideration is for people with larger balances. So in the UK, you may have heard of it, we have what's called a lifetime allowance charge. And I guess the most similar thing we have here in Australia is your transfer balance cap. So effectively, the lifetime allowance is anything above the threshold, which currently is £1,073,000, although there are some protected higher LTA that you can have, allowances, depending on the individual. But if we just say it's 1.073 million. Any excess on that, depending on how it's taken, so income 25% on the excess and lump sum 55% on the excess. So that's an important consideration because you've got two things. You've got, how do I get it all into Australia to begin with? And second of all, at what point, and are there any strategies to reduce my exposure over the longer term to that? So that needs a lot of careful consideration. And again, there's a lot of people who don't think their UK pensions are ever going to get to that size, but they actually do, particularly with the historically high transfer values we're seeing on defined benefit pensions in the UK. We're seeing a lot of people getting caught by this where previously they assumed they never would. So there, and I guess other than that, Miranda, I would say a lot of people come to me after being approached by someone who's overseas, so either in Australia or in the UK. And I often get advisors contacting me where their clients have been cold called by someone. And first and foremost, cold calling with regard to UK pensions has been banned for the last couple of years. And usually we all know what to do when we get a cold call related to a financial product. It's probably not best to go very far with that conversation over the phone. So it's really important that people do their homework. There aren't that many people in Australia specialising in this area, unfortunately. Certainly we don't have enough specialists to meet the demand that we're seeing at the moment. Hopefully that, hopefully we get more people interested in coming into this space. But yeah, it's there is no one size fits all, and it really is about sitting down and looking at what combination of everything and how it can be put together to put you in the best possible position. But don't put it off. That would be my advice to people.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jason. I think, Miranda, what Jason's been able to show us today is we talk about SMSF being a niche area and talking about the importance of specialisation. Well, we've kind of niched down even further again to try and understand what is a very specific but important part of the SMSF sector that is clearly growing. And Jason, your expertise today has certainly been hugely valuable, not only for Miranda and I, but most importantly for our audience. So thank you to you. And we look forward to, no doubt, getting you on at a future point in time for our SMSF advisor. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Miranda, that was hugely insightful from Jason in a topic that I guess in a media context, you don't see a lot of discussion about it. So what did you take away from today's discussion?
I thought he raised a lot of interesting points. I think number one, that even though it is a niche area, there is a lot of clients actually looking for this kind of advice. So it's probably one of those advice gap areas that might be worth expanding your services into if you're looking to do that, especially for SMSF advisors. I also thought some of the key kind of considerations he raised were pretty important about starting the process early so you don't miss those opportunities to get that pension in.
And I think the moving parts is really interesting. There's so many moving parts to it. If you think about, there's the construct of the fund to make sure that it complies. There's the process to get it moving across. There's the considerations of contribution caps and growth components and the like. And then you got the reporting bits once you get here as well, both in a 5-year and a 10-year sense to ensure that you're taking advantage of the exemptions as well. So I think I made mention of it as we finished. It's kind of a niche within a niche. Obviously, it has broader application than SMSF here, but SMSFs are clearly the primary benefactor from it when we look at the qualifying registered overseas plans that SMSFs achieve that status through the application process.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's complicated sort of working out how those two different tax systems interact and all the different rules for each country.
Yeah. So we have next time we're going to be federal budget time in March, which is a bit different, isn't it? So,
yes.
So what do we need to look forward to? And anything else as we wrap up our SMSF Advisor Show?
Yeah, so just the budget coming up next week. We've also got the big SMSF Association conference coming up not too far away next month.
Yeah, so 20th to the 22nd of April.
So I guess some of those are the big things to look out for.
Yeah, and I guess as always, if anyone's got any suggested topics and or speakers, how can they get in contact with us?
So they can get in contact at editor@smsfadvisoronline.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you all once again for being a part of this week's SMSF Advisor Show. We look forward to you joining us next time. Take care and bye for now.
Interest rates are rising fast, and that means higher mortgage repayments. But some lenders have increased their rates more than others, so that could mean your clients are now paying too much for their loan. We can quickly compare your client's rate with hundreds of similar loans, so you are confident that you've got the best rate on the market, or we'll find you a better rate. Make sure your clients aren't paying the highest interest rates. Call Finny today. Visit finny.com.au and let us take the research and admin out of finding a new rate for your clients.